Most recently, as I'm writing this, Israel has bombed a hospital, killing 500. And this is just the beginning. For a long time now, the UN couldn't do shit because America is the de facto leader of the West and they're allied with Israel. The genocide going on there is nothing new. We've seen it numerous times before. The only really unique thing is that they have a bit of a historical claim to the land, and even then, it's not that unique. Their rhetoric goes something like Israel has to conquer Palestine. Without the land, they simply cannot exist in peace, and the land rightfully belongs to them, and it should. For these human animals are violent and barbaric. Just look at how Hamas killed so many Israelis with their recent attack. We as the superior Jews need to defend our right to exist from these Eastern Europeans. Lebensraum, if you didn't know, is the idea that a nation needs more territory to exist, to prosper. The Nazis viewed everyone else as lesser, as threats to their Aryan race. They must dominate the lesser races before the lesser races infiltrate their superior race. They didn't view themselves as invading sovereign nations with their own rights. They viewed themselves as bringing about racial and technological progress. These Indians were uncivilized, and we have the divine right to settle on their land, violently dispossessing them. Need I mention the older tradition of colonialism in Africa, Asia, and the Americas? These are human animals, the defense minister of Israel said. Palestine is a part of Israel just as Ukraine is a part of Russia. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the West chose to fund the war, to keep it going at all costs. No negotiations were to be made, no negotiations of peace between Russia and Ukraine, Palestine, and Israel. American interests in these regions are far more important than the hundreds of thousands dying in war and the many more millions suffering from energy shortages and economic downturn from the sanctions, particularly in Western Europe. But who really cares about these issues? America will win in the end. It doesn't really matter if a few allies suffer or a few people die in conflict. And this is all backed up by the rhetoric that America supports Ukrainian independence, when in reality all they care about is geopolitical dominance. That was what the Marshall Plan really was at its core. It wasn't to rebuild Europe. There was absolutely no interest in saving the people. It was a game of politics. Everything is. So when Israel ramped up their genocide once again, the Americas supported them and tried to cover for them by promoting liberal perspectives. Though it's not Zionist, it's basically the same. Focusing on Hamas, this ragtag resistance group whose missiles can barely even do any damage with the exception of the recent attacks, instead focusing on the larger fucking genocide. There is a huge contradiction between our ideas and our actions. To dumb it down, the Enlightenment was a failure in every sense possible, not mentioning the failure of reason. Politically, it was extremely flawed. Civil rights exist only in the context of material rights. Yet Enlightenment thinkers only sought to replace monarchs with billionaires, God with nationalism, and the worship of reason. In fact, here's a quote by Mussolini. The fascist conception of life is a religious one, in which man is viewed in his immanent relation to a higher law, endowed with an objective will transcending the individual and raising him to conscious membership of a spiritual society. It was a bourgeois revolution, to use leftist terms, the Enlightenment. Liberal ideals by themselves are noble in theory, yes, But what is to guarantee that people follow such ideals and arbitrary rules? What is to stop the billionaire and the politician from acting immorally? This contradiction between liberal ideas and liberalism in practice was particularly seen in Judgment at Nuremberg was a movie released just 20 years after World War II. It was a classic. People try to reconcile with the Holocaust, but it's really not all that surprising as I illustrated before with the example of colonialism. The creation of the nation state is oppression. Nationalism is our support of our own oppression. And nationalism is seen in liberalism. It sometimes even evolves into fascism, which is why there's a profound irony in the trial, I think. For there was nothing done to prevent the Holocaust from happening again. Yeah, maybe a few papers were signed, but the illusion of civility quickly crumbles when we realize agreements mean nothing. It's just paper, it's just lines. Look at these people declare their love for their country. What difference does it make if a few go to prison for a bit? What difference does it make that Ernst Jannings gave this quite agreeable speech? What he says here sounds convincing because it's true. The trial is not here to prevent the rise of fascism again, it's only dealing with the fallout. And even then, they're hesitant to do it. Benjamin Netanyahu can genocide Palestinians because he has the support of the US military. Propaganda is essential in the conflict. Control what nations think so you can control what nations do. Thus, Ukrainians with their nationalism will not think about how to end the war but how to win. And only when Germany was cornered did they finally decide that what they did was wrong, for there is no more nation to fight for. For love of country, Ernst Jannings proclaimed. But this is only a false unity. Enlightenment thinkers wanted people to recognize themselves as French or German or English, right? As part of a nation instead of just being ruled by a monarch, having a nationality rather than having a common ruler, from being ruled by a monarch to ruling themselves, or rather being ruled by the idea of Frenchness and such. But this inevitably just caused more conflict as a result of division. Love of Germany only promoted hierarchy, the benefit of the Germans at the cost of everyone else. At the end of the movie, George Haywood said, once Ernst Jannings sentenced an innocent, he valued the country over the humanity, the origins of many conflicts. In Germany, it started with antagonizing the Jews, creating a German identity. Identity usually arises out of some common unified plight. This is true in everyday life as well, but false plight can also be created when there is a want for conflict, but no need for it. The plight of the Israelis is the Palestinian resistance to their apartheid colonialism. The plight of Russia is their powerlessness in global politics. The plight of Palestine, however, is the struggle to merely survive. The plight of Ukraine, however, is the struggle to merely survive. The plight of Jews in the Holocaust, however, is the struggle to merely survive. Judgment at Nuremberg was purely symbolic. There were no changes to material conditions, not intentionally anyway. Thus, this is merely a reminder of our failures, how even after the Holocaust we continue to kill and massacre, even after colonialism. The trial was for show, which is why it's so fitting that it's now a Hollywood movie, which inherently is also for show. The movie is sort of reconfirming our failures in this way, how little progress was made. And when you think about it, isn't that what anti war films are? They're not going to change the world or only reinforce capitalist realism. Of course, they would be free, and I think you know why. There is no justice but the politics of the global world, and if there is no justice, then maybe we can delude ourselves in a show trial. Maybe we can imagine that the courts are a form of justice. Just like how anti war films make us passive, the courts can too. Because we want to believe that the world isn't a nihilistic, bland, boring hellscape. Because we want to believe that human decency exists as a concept in and of itself. Society isn't that cruel, is it? The courts exist for justice, not social function, not keeping the status quo. The function of the courts has to be justice because we have to believe those 6 million, those 40 million, they didn't die for nothing. An Israeli state was created by the West after World War II to show some kind of bullshit solidarity. Of course, completely ignoring the fact that it will create a conflict within the region, as is typical with colonialism. This is what the Jews died for.